Let's talk about ideas, finding new ideas and subjects. You know, I think it's really important for photographers to be working on the things that are important to them, things that have meaning and passion and purpose behind them. And I say this because I think photographers who bring passion and purpose to their shooting end up being highly motivated themselves, and they usually create work that's inspiring. So that's why it's important to be able to learn to pitch story ideas effectively, because the ultimate goal is really to be getting paid for working on something that you are passionate about. And that means being able to get other people, editors mainly, interested in your passion too. So when you're making your pitch, do it from their perspective and not yours. Understand what types of things they're looking for and make sure it resonates with them. You know, it may be your passion, but in a pitch, you should let them see what's in it for them. Make your pitch simple, clear, and quick. Don't be overly wordy. Get right to the meat of it. Always remember to point out the benefits for them, for their publication, for their audience. It's also helpful here to do some research. Who is their audience? What is their publication really interested in? That kind of thing. I think you should speak with confidence and use visual words to describe the idea. And test your pitch. Read it out loud to yourself. Then try it on someone else. Do they get it? Is it understandable? If there are any points of confusion along the way, clean it up before you're sending it off. And if your idea is rejected, don't give up. Learn from this, refine the pitch, and then pitch it again. Now, Ami Vitale is a freelance photojournalist. She's based in Montana, of all places. She travels the world, doing really incredible and unique stories, and has really made a successful career out of this. She also happens to be one of the most positive people I've ever met. She is seriously like a giant ball of positive energy, and she's very well respected, not only by the people in the industry, but by her subjects as well. So I figured it'd be great to talk to Ami about this idea, this subject. Okay, we're on the line here with Ami Vitale. Hi, Ami.
Hello, Grover.
I'm so glad you're here, and I want to talk to you all about finding new ideas and subjects, because I think you are an absolute expert in this. My first question is, I know that you are one busy woman. You're always flying from one remote part of the world to another, and you're always coming back with incredible images that illustrate, really amazing stories. And one thing that impresses me so much is that you continue to come up with these original, unique, important stories. Where do these ideas come from?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I have to say, I've had, when I started my career, I worked as an editor, and that was a huge advantage because I watched the way news works. And I understood that a lot of the news we get is really pretty sensationalized often. And also, most journalists are sort of following each other and telling, there's hot stories, and then they forget about the story a week later, move on to the next thing. It's not them. It's just the way our business works. So I realized pretty early on that there is this desperate need to tell stories that are a little bit off the beaten track, and that people are really hungry for them. It's not that there's no demand for them. I think you just have to work a little harder and convince people that it is an important story. So I've made that the arc of my career really is going off and trying to find a quieter story. And I feel like there's a million of them that tell a bigger issue, but in a unique way that sometimes might surprise your audience. So I'll give you two quick examples. One was I was offered a grant last year to do a story about migration. And since I covered conflict so much, the obvious thing would be to do a story about refugees and conflict and the fact that they're forced to leave their homes. But I thought about it a little more and a little differently, and realized that there's this whole new, pretty new, really. There's a whole group of people that they're calling climate change refugees who are being forced to leave their homes because of the climate. And I just thought that was a different way of illustrating a bigger issue about migration. And the same thing. When I first started my career, a friend of mine was working in Angola where there was a conflict going on for 26 years. And I found it really heart-wrenching and noticed that nobody was telling this story in mainstream media. So I went around and asked editors, and their eyes kind of glazed over when I said Angola. And they said, Amy, nobody's interested in that story. Don't go to Africa. Don't do this story. It'll never get published. And I just thought to myself, that's incredible. They haven't even seen the work yet, and they're already saying no. But I went anyway, and I found different ways of telling a difficult story. So, for example, I found these oil expats living in the middle of a war zone, and they were surfing and also teaching Angolan kids how to surf. And so I found a lighter way to tell a deep, powerful story. And I think that's what you have to do is just be a little bit creative.
When you came back with that story, was it did people publish it?
It got published all over the world, and I was amazed. I was really amazed, and I published sort of variations. That's when I really first started my career, and I realized it's great to be a photographer because unlike a writer that has to speak, the same language, I could actually send the text and they would have it translated, but I had visuals, strong visuals, and I sold it everywhere from Portugal to Canada to the US and was able to really illustrate this story all over the planet.
Right, right. But how important is it for you to do things outside of work, and do these non-photography things ever end up giving you story ideas?
Grover, you brought up a really good point, and I think that everybody on the planet, whether you're a photographer or a salesman, whoever you are, you struggle with this balance of life because we're all working at a faster and faster, more frenetic pace. And it's tough. You don't want to give up an assignment or say no to something. But the irony is that I realized it's really important, especially at the beginning of your career, to make conscious decisions and start to say no to assignments, especially if they're leading you off into another track. So, for example, say you want to do documentary work and you're getting all of these portrait assignments or advertising assignments. It's true they pay the bills. But at the end of your life, is it going to build a body of work that you're proud of and that the direction you want to go into? And so early on, I made those choices and turned down certain kinds of assignments. So now I have a little bit more choice. I'm offered more assignments that are really in tune with the things that I care about. But like you said, I have to still turn those assignments down. And I actually just moved to Montana because I find that it's a quiet place for me to think about where I want to take my career next. And I want to write a book next. And this is a good place for me. And I'm really very picky now about what I do because it's true. It's just we have a finite time on this planet and you have to make choices about how you want to spend your time.
Okay, I have this top 10 list thing that I'm doing, so I'm going to ask you. If I were to ask you to come up with a top 10 list of tactics that people can use to help them find great story ideas, what would you put on that list?
I don't know if I can come up with 10, but I'll give it a shot. So the very first thing I would tell people is to read voraciously. It's so important. And I mean all kinds of different media, from books to international newspapers. They're all online. There's no excuse now. You can definitely find a lot of cool, interesting stories that haven't been done. And that's one other piece of advice is to, when you're reading, very often a writer who has no visual sense about a story might write an amazing story or a book. And I think to myself, wow, this would be a fantastic visual story. So I do get inspiration from books and even a small little clip from a newspaper, and I think, wow, that could be a really interesting story. So that's one idea. I also talk to all kinds of people from the guy at the grocery store to the mayor, and I'm asking if I'm interested in one issue. I'll be asking them similar questions, and the idea is to get different perspectives on the same topic, and it just gives you new ideas for telling stories. I try to localize and humanize a bigger issue. So it's got to be relevant to people on this planet. It can't be something that it's only you are interested in. I feel like what I do, I want to connect people and help them understand each other. And so I pick bigger issues and just humanize them. And what I mean by that is sort of finding maybe one person and tell the story through their eyes. So, for example, the migration story in Bangladesh. Um, Very often, these farmers are forced to leave their land and move to an overpopulated city, and this is happening all over the planet. So, I told this story through one guy's eyes. Um, Also, and I've mentioned this already, but it's very important to think visually about your idea. Make sure the project is visual because sometimes a story might be great on paper, but it's just not visual. And so as photographers, we've got to make sure that you're going to come through with powerful visuals. I also write a lot. I think that we need to be thoughtful and think, and sometimes you don't really, you can think about a story, but unless you put it on paper, it helps you think things through more clearly. So it's a good process to go through. And I'll apply for grants even if I don't expect to get them if it's a new idea. I'll just go through the process of writing a grant proposal just so that it helps me become more lucid about my idea and what it is. And then I try to be an observer of life. Don't overlook all the subtle things around you in your own life. Um, you're the one closest to the story. You know it. You're the one living in your neighborhood. You see change. So just to be a keen observer is really important. And then finally, I think the most important thing is to trust your own instincts about a good story. Because I've found that I've pitched stories and maybe an editor just doesn't understand it. And I realize, hey, I get this story and they're not seeing it. And I keep working on it and trying to um, make it better, make the story stronger and better until they see what I'm thinking. And you're the only one. You're the storyteller. You've got to trust yourself and find a home for it. So,
That's amazing information. Thank you so much.
sure.
Also, you just teed it up perfectly because the next section of this webinar is trusting yourself and your instincts. So I'm going to ask you to hang on, and we're gonna get into that now as well.
Okay.
Okay, trusting yourself and your instincts. Why is it important to trust your own instincts? It's that little voice inside your head that is so easy to ignore. Should you be paying closer attention to that? And I think the answer to that is yes, because that voice is you. If you can listen to the right voice, you can get unfiltered, honest advice and direction that can be extremely useful. And I say right voice because there's more than one. Be careful. There are both low and high self-esteem voices in all of us. And try not to listen to the negative, I can't do it type of voices. Those are coming from a place of fear, usually like a fear of failure. Instead, realize that this voice isn't truly you. It's the positive, high self-esteem voice that you should be listening to. Listen to those positive messages and don't think too hard about it. Go with your gut feel and trust that it's right. In the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about the concept of thin slicing, where your brain is capable of evaluating hundreds of different cues simultaneously, all via your subconscious mind, in a split second, producing that feeling that you just can't quite put into words. And I think we've all felt this, where you can't really explain it, but you just have a certain feeling about something. Learn to listen to this and to trust these messages. So with that in mind, let's get back to Amy and talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so from my perspective as an Amy V fan, um, it seems like you do everything right, and I'm wondering if you've ever failed. So,
Uh,
no.
of
but
course,
but
you're
but
joking.
really, should people be afraid to fail, or is there a hidden blessing in failure?
Yeah, no, you brought up a really, really important point. And in fact, I just taught a workshop last week, and I think that's the first thing I said to all my students. It's, you should, aim to fail, especially in a workshop, because I promise you, you're going to learn so much more than if you were this tremendous success. By making all those mistakes, you're going to be a better photographer, a better person. I mean, I can't tell you, I feel like my whole life has been a series of failures, and sort of sheer luck has allowed me to have a few successes. And I'm not afraid of failure. I mean, it sucks. Absolutely. It's not fun and it's depressing, but I definitely have learned to have a thick skin and dust yourself off and start, get up and dance again to the next one, because you've got to. That's I mean, it's just part of life, really.
Well, when it comes to great story ideas, and which you seem to have all the time, and they always end up getting published by impressive publications. So, when it comes to pitching ideas, how important is it that you trust your own instincts?
It really is the fact that you know this story better than anyone. And it may not be a question that it's a bad story. It may be just that you didn't communicate it to the editor. They might have a completely different vision of what it's going to be. And very often I sometimes have to go and work on a story a little bit first to bring back some sense of what it's going to look like, because not everybody's going to understand what you're thinking. So I've been doing this long enough to get a good sense of. The other thing is I read and I know how, what stories I feel are not being told in the mainstream media, and I find a little niche for them. And I think there's plenty of stories out there. That's another, if you want to call it a secret. My secret is not to do what everybody else is doing, but to go to the places where you know, people, first of all, you get better access because people don't have a bazillion journalists banging on the door. They're happy to share their lives with you and tell their story. So you get great access. And then, frankly, it's an original story. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Now, in your travels, I'm sure you've been in some tricky situations that required you trusting your own instincts. Can you talk a little bit about, let's say, Palestine after dark, where you ignored your instincts and wound up in a situation?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because the few times when I haven't, it's funny. I really believe that there's other signs like sixth sense, that tell you when, sort of alert you to things going on around you. And the few times that I've ignored those are when I've gotten in serious trouble. And so, for example, I was in Gaza, I think, and I was shooting a funeral, and people were angry. They wanted vengeance, and I stayed a little bit too long, and I felt it. I knew it. I actually thought to myself, like 10 minutes before, it's time to go. The mood is changing, and I just felt it, and I ignored it for that one last great picture, right? It's always the last one that gets you in trouble. And then the only thing that really saved me, I mean, a huge, angry, young mob of men came up, and they started thinking that I was a CIA agent and they wanted blood. And the only thing that saved me was the fact that I spent the entire day with a group of women upstairs in their home, and they were towards the end of this procession, and they came and rescued me because they trusted me because I spent all day with them. And so they whisked me away, and I just thought there's no reasoning with a mob. That could have been the end. It could have ended very sadly. And so, yeah, I definitely am very in tune now with what's going on around me and paying attention to little signals and watching people. And it is sort of a mixture of experience and your instincts.
All right, I'm not going to ask you to do another top 10 list because you already did that. But what are some of the things that you think people can do to help themselves learn to trust themselves and their ideas a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a tough question, but I guess the main thing is just to practice and work at it, and then fail. That's exactly, it all is sort of revolving back to the first few questions. It's all about having enough failures to know when you have a good idea and not being afraid to fail. So, you start to see what's going to work for you and what is genuinely a good idea and it's all pretty, it's complex and simple. It's just practice. Basic practice. That's it. And I was never confident. I mean, I just think back in the beginning of my career and I was so, I just didn't know what I was doing and definitely didn't have that inner self-confidence. And I think it's just a question of time. And after a while you just start realizing, okay, this is going to work and not panicking all the time. It's okay to fail as long as, you don't hurt people along the way or yourself, then, make mistakes.
Yeah, as long as you learn from it, it's all good.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Well, Amy, I really appreciate your time. I'm glad you came in here. And
Thank you. It's really fun and you're doing great work.
oh, well, thank you. Okay,
All
talk
right.
to you soon.
Bye-bye. Okay, bye.